Long considered America's ultimate penitentiary, Alcatraz got its start as a military coastal battery in 1853. This battery and its small garrison were tasked with defending San Francisco Bay. By 1858, the United States Army Corps of Engineers had finished constructing Fort Alcatraz. This fort was defended by 85 cannon, and had an initial garrison of 200 soldiers. Given how Fort Alcatraz was an island that was surrounded by strong currents of cold water, in 1859 Alcatraz was designated as a military prison for the Pacific Regional Command. Although it initially housed Union soldiers who had been accused of various crimes, by 1861, it was being used to house citizens who had been accused of treason, as well as Confederate prisoners of war. By the time the Civil War had ended in 1865, the garrison had more than doubled to 433 officers and soldiers. Since advances in artillery had by this time rendered the fortress obsolete, the decision was made to convert the fortress into a larger military prison. In 1909, the Citadel, a three-story barracks which had formerly housed the fortress's garrison, was demolished to make way for a massive concrete cell block. The Citadel's basement was converted into the new prison's first cell block, which would later come to be known as the Spanish Dungeon. Many of the fortress's old corridors, battlements, and ammunition magazines are still there, having been paved over by the new construction. The prison was divided into 4 cell blocks. Cell blocks A, B, and C were designed for the general population. Cell block D was designed for solitary confinement. The average cell measured 5 feet wide by 9 feet deep. Unlike other prisons which could house 2 or more prisoners per cell, the cells at Alcatraz were designed for single occupancy. Each cell contained a cot, a sink, and a toilet. The cells in cell block D were slightly larger. They were designed to house prisoners who were too dangerous to admit to the general population. While the prisoners in the other cell blocks could dine together, shower, and exercise, the prisoners in D block were kept in solitary confinement. All meals were delivered through a small portal in the door. The administrative offices were in the front of the prison while the dining hall and the kitchen were in the back. In 1933, budget cuts that had been caused by the Great Depression, combined with the growing need by the Federal Bureau of Prisons for a maximum security facility, caused the Army to cede control of Alcatraz to the Federal Bureau of Prisons.
Yeah!
The Bureau of Prisons spent 10 months remodeling Alcatraz and upgrading its security. 4 guard towers were built outside the main cell block so that all areas outside the main building would be under constant supervision. The bars to each cell were upgraded with tool-proof steel. 2 gun galleries were erected in the main cell block, and staffed with guards who were armed with machine guns. Since the mess hall was a potentially dangerous place since it was the one area where all prisoners, except the ones in cell block D, could come together, remotely activated tear gas canisters were built into overhead panels. The quality of the food was also significantly upgraded. Acting on the belief that bad food lowered morale, the first warden ordered his guards to eat the same food that the prisoners received. By all accounts, the food at Alcatraz was considered the best in the entire federal prison system. Pictured here is a recreated Alcatraz recipe that includes bacon-wrapped meatloaf, mashed potatoes, sautéed vegetables, caramelized onions with fried mushrooms and gravy, and freshly baked bread. This particular meal was accompanied by a cream of potato soup and bread pudding. Since it would not have been feasible to have guards coming and going, all prison staff had to live at Alcatraz. Comfortable guard quarters were constructed. The warden had a large house. The senior guards had smaller houses. The rest of the staff had apartments. A private bowling alley and commissary were also provided. The first group of 137 prisoners arrived at Alcatraz on August 11, 1934. Not only were they handcuffed and wearing leg irons, but they were also escorted by 60 heavily armed FBI agents and U.S. Marshals. Alcatraz became a veritable who's who, among a rogues gallery of infamous criminals. Included among those who were incarcerated at the prison, that had become known as the Rock, was Al Capone. Al Capone ran a criminal empire in Chicago that 1929 was worth $64 million. Adjusted for inflation, in today's currency, This would have been worth $1.76 billion. His enterprises included prostitution, gambling, bootlegging, and protection rackets. By the time he was sent to prison, Capone was directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 200 people. Included among this number were 7 members of a rival gang. Disguised as police, his men stood their rivals against a wall and executed them. This slaughter would become known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. When he began serving an 11-year sentence for tax evasion at a federal prison in Atlanta, Georgia, his wealth and power were such that the guards and the warden were happy to give him special privileges and to do favors for him. Here is a picture of his prison cell in Georgia. In 1934, Attorney General Homer Cummings, along with Sanford Bates, the head of the federal prisons, arranged to have him sent to Alcatraz, where he would be unable to manipulate the system. Another famous prisoner at Alcatraz was George Machine Gun Kelly. George would most likely have remained a petty criminal if he hadn't met Catherine Thorne. It was Catherine who bought him his first machine gun and urged him to practice. In July of 1933, Catherine and Kelly kidnapped a wealthy businessman named Charles Urschel and held him for a $200,000 ransom. This brazen act catapulted Kelly to public enemy number 1 on the FBI's most wanted list. He was caught just 2 months later. Kelly was initially sent to Leavenworth in Kansas while Catherine went to a federal prison in Cincinnati. When Kelly began bragging about how he was going to break out of prison so he could rescue Catherine, the prison officials decided to transfer him to Alcatraz. Robert Stroud grew up in an abusive home and ran away when he was 13. By 18, he had become a pimp in Alaska. He was convicted of murder after he killed a man who had attacked one of his women. He was sentenced to 12 years and was sent to McNeil Island in Puget Sound. While he was in prison, he stabbed and killed a guard. He was given a life sentence and was transferred to Leavenworth. It was at Leavenworth that he developed an interest in birds. The prison warden encouraged this and gave him access to the prison library. Over the next few years, Stroud began working with birds and eventually had a collection of 300 canaries. Based upon his study of these birds, he wrote a book called Diseases of Canaries, which he arranged to have smuggled out of prison. Much to the annoyance of several guards, his book was published and he began to make some money. Despite his lack of formal education, Robert Stroud is credited with having made important contributions to the field of avian pathology. In one letter that he was able to have smuggled out, he said,
Darwin credited birds with having no sense of smell. Many biologists agree. I do not. The organs are not as well developed as in mammals, but I have examined them in microscopic sections and they are undoubtedly functional. Also, blind birds can find food and water, but normally birds have such wonderful eyes and ears that they do not make much use of their sense of smell.
In 1942, after an inspection found that he had been making alcohol in his prison cell, he was transferred to Alcatraz. He did not receive the courtesy of any advance notification and was forced to abandon his birds, their equipment, and all of his research material. At Alcatraz, a psychiatrist named Romney Ritchie diagnosed him as a psychopath with a 112 IQ. Having lost his birds and equipment, Stroud began writing a history of the penal system. The warden at Alcatraz was careful to not allow him to publish this manuscript. He died in the Springfield Medical Center at the age of 73 after having spent 54 years in prison, 42 of which were sent in solitary confinement. Despite all of the security measures that were in place, Alcatraz had a number of escape attempts. The most violent occurred on May 2, 1946. This breakout attempt was masterminded by Bernard Coy, who was serving time for armed robbery. He was assisted by Marvin Hubbard, Joseph Kritzer, and Clarence Carnes. Marvin Hubbard was serving a life sentence for armed robbery and kidnapping. Joseph Kritzer was a bank robber. Clarence Carnes was a thief and a murderer. Having observed that the armed guard in one of the gun galleries followed a set break routine, Bernard managed to break into the gallery by squeezing himself between the bars. Using the machine gun and pistol that he had taken from the gallery, Bernard and his cronies took 9 guards hostage. Sadly for them, in their haste to find the key that would open the doors to the yard, they managed to jam the lock. By this time, the situation was already hopeless. The escape attempt had been noticed, the alarm had been sounded, and the remaining guards, including all of those who had been off shift, were now arming themselves. The Coast Guard had been alerted, and their boats were circling the island to keep any of the criminals from escaping. The state police had been notified, and reinforcements from different law enforcement agencies were already gathering at local piers for transport to Alcatraz. When the guards tried to assault the cell block, the prisoners began firing at them. Since his men were not trained in combat, the warden called the Navy base at Treasure Island. The base sent 2 platoons of battle-hardened Marines. The Marines were all World War II veterans who had fought against the very best troops that Imperial Japan could field. Using machine guns to provide suppressing fire, they advanced against the main cell block and used grenades to force the criminals back. In the end, Kritzer, Hubbard, and the ringleader, Bernard Coy, fought to the death. 2 guards were killed during the prison takeover. 14 more were wounded. For his role in the escape attempt, Clarence Carnes received a second life sentence. Only 3 men are known to have gone missing at Alcatraz. Their names were John Anglin, his brother Clarence, and an associate named Frank Morris. On the morning of June 12, 1962, during an early morning bed check, these 3 prisoners were found to be missing. They had created dummy heads using papier-mâché to fool the night guards into thinking that they were asleep in their beds. Each man had escaped through a grate into a utility corridor. They had used the corridor as a workroom where over the course of several weeks or even months, they hand-stitched a rubber raft using 50 stolen raincoats. They had also made some wooden paddles. Sometime during the previous night, they had entered the utility corridor, gathered their raft and paddles, and had shimmied up a ventilation shaft to get access to the roof. From there, they climbed down the bakery smokestack, climbed over the fence, snuck to the northeast shore of the island, and launched their raft. They were never seen again. To this day, nobody knows if they were successful in crossing the bay, or if their raft sank. On March 21, 1963, Alcatraz closed after 29 years of operation as a federal prison. The penitentiary was over 3 times more expensive to run than other prisons. A lot of this expense had to do with the cost of literally having to ship everything the prison needed in by boat. Over time, saltwater saturation had also caused the concrete buildings to erode. The fact that 3 people had managed to escape from Alcatraz the year before also meant that this prison was not as escape-proof as everyone had believed. Alcatraz is now a museum that attracts some 1.5 million tourists per year. In 1986, it was designated as a historical landmark. According to the guards, the most haunted place at Alcatraz is said to be in cell 14D. As you may recall, the D block cells were all used for solitary confinement. The guards claim that strange noises have been coming from this cell. At times, people have heard the clanking sound of chains and muffled knocks on the walls. Some guards have even reported seeing a ghostly figure in this cell. Voices have also been reported as having come from D cells 11, 12, and 13, even though all of these cells were empty at the time the voices were heard. A ghost hunter named Richard Sennett once spent the night in cell 12D. He said that as soon as the steel door closed, he felt icy fingers close about his throat and had a series of disturbing psychic visions of the bodies of dead men who had been dismembered. In 1992, Alcatraz was featured on a TV show called Sightings. Several of the Park Service staff were interviewed for this program and all of them confirmed the haunted history of this prison. Among the stories they shared were mysterious crashing sounds, the sound of running footsteps, terrible screams, moans, and cell doors that closed by themselves. Some staff members also reported the feeling that they were being watched even if there was nobody else around. On one occasion, a CBS News team brought in a celebrity psychic named Sylvia Brown, who was accompanied by former Alcatraz convict, Leon Thompson. While touring the laundry room, Sylvia said that she encountered an unseen presence and felt as though something violent had occurred in this room. When she described a tall thin man with a bald head and small, beady eyes, Leon Thompson recognized him as having been a prisoner who was known as the Butcher. He went on to say,
"He was a hitman with Murder Incorporated before they caught him. His name was A.B. Maldowitz, but we called him Butcher. Another prisoner killed him here in the laundry room."
When CBS checked the old prison records, they found that a prisoner named A.B. Maldowitz had indeed been murdered in the laundry room. This picture was taken in the crumbling remains of the old mortuary. The mortuary is where the bodies of the prisoners who were killed during the 1946 escape attempt were stored until they could be transferred to the coroner's office in San Francisco. Is this swirling mist just a trick of the light, or do you think these are ghosts? Another ghost who may have been photographed is the Lady in Green. Although Alcatraz never housed female prisoners, there were women who lived on the island. These would have been the wives of male staff members. The Green Lady has been so named because she has been seen wearing a green dress. It is thought that she may have been the wife of one of the wardens. In July of 2012, a woman named Christine Castillo was visiting Alcatraz when she took a photograph of a vintage truck. Here is the story of her experience.
Myself, my daughter, and her college friend toured Alcatraz in July. This picture was taken using the phone of my daughter's friend. If you look closely, a woman is sitting in the driver's seat of the truck. When this picture was taken, there was nobody in that truck. I know because I love classic cars and trucks, and was waiting for my turn to take a photo. I was off to the rear left of the truck. There was a mother and daughter off directly to the left of the truck, and my daughter had gone on ahead. The truck was a display and I believe it belonged to one of the wardens. This photo shook me, my daughter, and her friend pretty bad.
In 2014, a British tourist took this picture in the visitation room. Given how dangerous the prisoners at Alcatraz were, no physical contact was allowed. All visits had to be made in this room with the visitor being separated from the prisoner through a thick pane of glass. Each visit would have also been monitored by a guard. The tourist who took this picture said that nobody had been there when this picture was shot. If you look at the picture, you can clearly see a woman who appears to be wearing a green dress. So what do you think? Is Alcatraz really haunted, or are people just letting their imaginations run away with them? What about the pictures of the green lady? Were these pictures fabricated, or do you think that the photographer was really able to catch a picture of the green lady? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.
If you liked this video and would like to see more content, please click on the like and subscribe buttons.